Good evening. My name is Sydney VanLare, and today I'm going to be presenting you on a architect that certainly deserves her spotlight. So let's get into it. Alrighty, so I'm so excited to be sending you on a fascinating journey into the life and work of the one and only Margrete Schutte-Lithosky. She is Austrian, so please bear with me on my pronunciation, but she is an Austrian groundbreaking architect who is most well known for her revolutionary design on the way we think about space and functionality for the modern day kitchen. So, what I want you to do is if you can see your kitchen, I can see my kitchen from where I'm sitting, but if you are in a dorm, apartment, condo, townhouse, even a regular home, if you can see, look, or stand in your kitchen, do it now. And while you're standing in there, stand at either your sink, oven, or main counter space. And if you can either reach or walk to in less than 10 steps to any three of those points, that is all thanks to Margaret. So she came up with this incredible 3-point system in a working kitchen space to allow for this more maneuverable, efficient way to cut down on time for food prep. So overall, the reason why I open with that is kitchen design, although Margaret does not like to be known for this mainly, she is in fact most well known for the modern Western world kitchen design. That is her magnum opus. So her background and her occupation is that she's an Austrian social architect. She deems herself a social architect because she is one of the first architects when it comes to design who really considers the user and the experience that that user has and interacts with that design, which today we call that the UX/UD design. So like user experience, user device, user design. And she was actually already applying these practices back in, the 1920s. So she was born January 23rd, 1897, in the district of in the Margretine district of Vienna, Austria. So I believe that that's where she gets her name from, is that district. And she actually died at the age of 102, which is incredibly impressive, if you ask me, for her to be a centenarian. And the other great thing about Margaret is that she was the first female student at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. So she was the first female student at the university in general, let alone the first female to be studying architecture in Vienna, which is pretty incredible. So her background is obviously that she was born in Austria. She studied at, I am not even going to try to pronounce this word, but it is now known as the School of Arts and Crafts in Vienna. And so this is where she was mostly influenced by the modernist movement, principles of functionalism due to the revolutionary designs of the one and only Bauhaus, because of course, who wouldn't be influenced by the Bauhaus at this time? I mean, let's go back, please. Look at the Bob. Homegirl is definitely modernist influenced. She's a very forward thinking woman. And again, I just went into on this side of my elaboration on the user experience design. That is seriously what she deemed herself, was a social architect, very strictly. Um, and we got to put some respect on that because she was well ahead of her time in terms of thinking about functionality over aesthetics when it came to architecture in Austria at the time. So her background with her family, she actually comes from a very bourgeoisie family dynamic. Her grandfather was the mayor, of course, of a district in Austria. Her mother was a relative of a really well-known German historian and art museum curator. So, of course, very well known. Her father, in fact, was, I couldn't find anything regarding his actual like occupation or anything like that. It mainly, all I got was that he was a very liberal minded servant. And at the time, we're experiencing communism, we're experiencing Nazism, and there's a lot of things politically that Margaret and her family are navigating at this point in time, with World War I happening in 1914. So that's where I'll move into my next slide, is talking about, Margaret during her teens. So she'll be 17, I believe she was 17 at the time when World War I began. So after World War I ended, so Vienna, Austria used to be the Empire of Habsburg, and then this crashed, and then the Republic began in 1918. So, growing up in this political climate, it was obviously really difficult for her to pursue academics and um, difficult in general for everyone to make money. And so, honestly, at the beginning of her academic career, her parents did not want her to even apply to college or go in architecture because women in architecture was not a thing. And she defied all odds by applying to the school anyways and getting in, which was incredible because it was also during that time that modernism reached its absolute peak in Europe. So, because the Bauhaus kind of paved this path for architecture, art, iconic art schools, it kind of, was a perfect storm for people like Margaret, who ended up having a very successful career. And ultimately, the Bauhaus is what encouraged her, influenced her, and inspired her to study this field, which was incredible. So her main influence, as I've already said several times, was modernism, the Bauhaus movement. I mean, think about how like socialist this time was. I mean, it was like revolutionary. And so after she had an incredibly successful education, she ended up being heavily influenced by this type of, communal living that the Bauhaus represented. And it was actually a main reason why she went into communal housing. And she designed several students' homes, dorms, kindergartens, and other urban housing and community based building, which we'll go into further. But incredibly inspiring to see how impactful it was on her. So, to go into her education a little bit, she was the first female student, again, to apply to the University of Applied Arts. Can you imagine? Because I seriously can't even imagine. Her mentor at the time was Oscar Sternard. I really do apologize. Sternard? I do apologize. And I have a Dutch last name, so, you'd think this would be easier for me, but it is not. Okay, so Oscar also was an Austrian architect. He was also a sculptor, a designer. He was a set designer for films and theater. He was a really incredibly talented person. And also, I'll be referring to, she preferred to be called Gret. So instead of Margaret, she'll be Gret the rest of the presentation, just so I don't cause any confusions. But so Gret earned several awards, as I mentioned, in her career um, before she even graduated, which is impressive. Again, to be pioneering as the first female student at this university, first female student in architecture, first woman studying architecture in the whole country at the time of Vienna is just madness. And the fact that she was earning accolades and awards at the time just show how talented she really was. Overall, so Oscar's mentorship is mainly how she gained experience in designing affordable and functional housing. So this is what really led to her involvement in this group called the May Coolidge. So this is the architect regime. This was the clan of architects, incredibly talented group of people. It was made up of 17 architects, including people such as Gret herself. Gret actually met her husband Wilhelm Schutte earlier or later on, but within the first year of them being together, they got married and they met in this group. So he was also a very talented architect himself. We got Arthur Korn. We've also got Fred Formbach. We've got Hans Schmidt and also Eric Mottner and the Dutch Mart Stam. Mart Stam. Yes. So with that being said, the main architect was Ernest May, and at the time, if you've not heard of Ernest May, he is also an incredibly esteemed architect of his time. Especially during the 1920s, he was on one doing urban planning because the country was just in shambles and the political climate was insane. There was a massive need. It's just the reason why the Bauhaus emerged when it did. There was a massive need for people to express themselves, and especially through like an artistic background. But with Ernest specifically, there was a need for homes, there was a need for buildings, communal spaces. And so during all of this pining and being called by the city council, all of these architects came all together. They were called the May Coolidge, and they were commissioned to solve the Frankfurt housing crisis in 1926, which was the like off the she went into the world, hit the ground running with this part of her architecture career. Again, the first woman to be doing this, and already she's being commissioned to build houses. I mean, you got to give her so much credit because that's just so astounding. So aside from that, this is when we really get into her magnum opus. The reason why I opened this presentation with stand in your kitchen and shout, "Thank you, Margaret," because she did that. And again, although she doesn't want to be known specifically for just a kitchen, she is in fact completely credited every single time her name is mentioned, because what makes this so astounding was this was the first fitted kitchen. So before this, you had a kitchen was very separate. For those who are North Carolina locals, if you've ever been to the Biltmore House, if you look at the kitchen, it's very detached. Everything is detached. Especially if you were in a home that had servants or servitude, then everything was detached. The kitchen was meant to be eaten in, and there was a separate space for food preparation. Well, since obviously servitude completely moved out, we're way beyond that at this point, and especially in Europe, where you need to have a functional workspace for food preparation, and that common housewife was also very common during this time, and kitchens just didn't make sense. Everything was so separate, and this was the first like fully built-in cabinetry, fully built-in like countertops, sink space, prep space. I mean, if you'll see on the right here, she has fully built-in drawers where the purpose of this design was pouring pitchers. So you see at my point right here, there are pouring pitchers that were not in this picture, but this picture most of all, you see this incredible design. They were actually designed after ammunition containers because she was inspired by the Ford assembly line. And of course, World War I is happening, don't forget, or it just ended, but that was what she grew up in. So of course she's inspired by like wartime assembly line practicality and functionality. So why not use that design and implement it here, because it's useful? And so everything was labeled and it was easy and accessible. And again, you've got this workstation where everything could just be prepped, and it was just so easy. And this was the first type of kitchen that everything made sense. And that's why it was so genius. And it was made, she said that she designed it not as a housewife, because when she designed this kitchen, she outright claimed, "Hey, I've never cooked before," which is also moment of pause for that she designed this as an architect, not as a housewife. And it just made that much sense to her after studying movement data and finding scientific studies on the certain colors of the cabinetry, that blues and greens repel insects, and that the workstation, the sink, and the oven are the most traveled to points in the kitchen. So to make it a triangle and have that 3-point system makes movement in the kitchen the smoothest. So it's made for food prep. The space is made for the function is made for the space. And as you can see here, we can really appreciate the color, the vibrancy. I love that you've got this chair for workspace, planning out recipes. You've got your shelf. We've got the open window, built-in cabinetries. Notice how it's glass. You can see everything. And you've got the sink above, the tile behind for splashing. You've got these built-in grooves to either side for setting dishes. And obviously the pouring pitchers. I mean, it's just truly every detail is so genius. It's genius. And this is furthermore someone interacting in the space. There were also, over time, things have been added, of course, of drying racks, trash can disposal. And here's a great layout right here of that first fitted kitchen, where you can see, you can look at every single point in here, and this is exactly how it's laid out now. So again, famous quote, right? So other projects that she worked on, community urban housing. So she worked on the Workbund Heinz Sedlung, House 61 and 62. Here's the interior, here's the exterior. This was a very large urban plan. So again, fixing that housing crisis, and this neighborhood right here is so incredible, because truthfully, you can click on the site that I was using, you can click on any of these, and the addresses are obviously updated, but you can see each and every architect that worked on each and every home. And every single one of them had influence on the other. And that just shows the testament of the May Coolidge regime. I mean, really so neat. And each architect got to plan their home based on the function that they preferred. So, and I've got the translation here, but you've got the living room, the kitchen, and then this is the front room. And she had this incredible twisting staircase. Notice how it's not in the front. It's not the first thing you see when you walk in. It's tucked away. It's out of the space. As soon as you walk in, boom, right here, but you've got the bathroom, immediately having the living room accessible, and then the kitchen. And so she does the same thing in all of her designs, is that she plans and designs based on accessible living space. Like, you want your living room to be huge, and then there you go, boom, the kitchen is small, tucked away, but also easily accessible to your living room. She wanted that easy flow of functionality. There wasn't constant closed off rooms and doors. So this is really where the test of time comes in for her apartment. So her and Wilhelm, her husband, got married at the beginning of Gret's and Wilhelm's careers as architects. They met around 1930, got married after a year of being together, and they had a beautiful, beautiful marriage. And it wasn't until 1968 that Wilhelm ended up passing away. And after he passed away, this is when Gret moved into her apartment. And her apartment was pretty revolutionary because it was only 592 square feet, and she lived there for the last 30 years of her life. And mind you, she lived to 102. So just think about that. 592 square feet until she was 102 years old. It's incredible. Like, what was her life? Truly. So post-war Germany, of course, households were majority single or widowed women due to the war, obviously. And so it became a really big challenge in Frankfurt, specifically in Vienna, which, how do you find housing for one person? Like, what's too much house? And how do you afford it if you're a single widowed woman, got no kids, any of the things? So she had the idea of converting attics of all of the large modern buildings into small apartments. And that's exactly what she did. That's why her house was so small. And truthfully, again, showing how she knows how a space should and could function. Here's some incredible interiors, and I love how colorful it is. Really separating from her modernistic views by having some, kind of Victorian creeping in there. We see that with the wallpaper, but you still have the modernist influence with the couch design, the lamps, even this incredible Adolf Loos lamp coming in, very Victorian, having the fabric. But again, still super modern at the same time. Like how simple. In the bathroom with everything built in, everything has a purpose. You just love to see it, honestly. So October 2022, I believe, her apartment was officially restored, and it is now officially open to the public eye, which is really exciting. So, hey, if you're ever in Frankfurt, Vienna, want to go head down there, you can see her apartment. Last thing I'll say, here are her plans, which are quite brilliant, if I say so myself. And that is her whole apartment. I just think that that's incredible for a 102-year-old woman. So obviously, overall, the point of this project was to highlight someone who really deserved the spotlight and has been overlooked in the design world. And I chose the gorgeous one and only Austrian architect, Margrete Schutte-Lithosky. And I am just so glad that I got to present on this project and show her piece de resistance. I mean, I am just tickled to know that every time I walk into my kitchen, I can thank Gret. It's truly amazing because you never think of these things. You never think to walk into your kitchen and be like, I wonder who came up with this. But lo and behold, it was an Austrian architect, the first of her kind. Thank you so much. I had an incredible time in this class, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.